We have not settled on that. In fact, my goal is to make it run on both. And I want to make it run on both because it is an open source project. And I would like to. And the goal is to make this free along the same idea how, I'm going to say a bad word in the ColdFusion community, the same way WordPress is free.
ColdFusion Alive, the podcast for the ColdFusion community. Discover practices, tools, techniques, tips and trends for modern ColdFusion development. Brought to you by TerraTech, the ColdFusion experts. Develop, secure, optimize. Here is your host, the founder of TerraTech, Michaela Light.
Hey, welcome back to the podcast. I'm here with John Farrar, and we're going to be talking about ColdFusion and open source learning and an amazing new project he's working on that we're going to dig into and the technology he's using to create that. And also coming up, we'll talk a bit about using open source in the corporate environment, which I know that's frightening for some people, but we're going to dig into there anyway because we're two brave ColdFusion developers. So welcome, John.
Hello.
And for those of you who don't know John, he has been doing technology for decades now, I believe. And not only that, he's going to prove to us the decades. Oops, he disappeared from his virtual background now. Here's the proof of the decades.
Yes, that was beaming in and out.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to get a certificate saying you've been doing ColdFusion since 1907, you know. But,
no, actually, I started in 90s. In
the 90s, yes, along with the rest of us.
I started in 77.
77, when you came out of the Navy doing flight simulation technicians.
Well, it was before the Navy.
Programming.
I worked on the Commodore PET. The first computer I worked.
Wow, I remember those. All in one thing, VDU at the top and the keyboard all molded together.
It had 32K. That was the total system memory.
K, not gigs.
Not
yes, I know.
Not gigs.
So, K, yeah, I know. It's incredible. How did we do things back then? I can't believe it. So, open source learning server, that sounds like another learning solution. Why does the world need another one? If you don't mind me asking.
Well, part of how I approach things, my outlook in life is a lot of times people will start opposing each other. And it's the whole best practices philosophy. I was talking with my wife about this earlier. And you'd think a new improvement made anything that came before it bad. And that's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, I like camping. And you know what? I can go camping with a tent, all the old equipment. It still works. It's still a good experience. If I don't get to bring my watch, because I don't get to charge it because I'm away too long, and I didn't want to bring solar power, it's still a good experience. Well, the same thing, a lot of what's out there right now for education is a good experience. It's not a bad experience, but there's opportunities to do better. And that's what I'm looking at. What are the new opportunities? And that's why we're calling it the Open Learning Server. The first opportunity that triggered this in my mind, because I've had courses online before, and I thought, well, okay, what if I want to take that course and move it because it was at Learnable? And what if I wanted to move it to Udemy?
Well, what happens right now? Is that possible?
Yeah, it is. You keep all your original resources and you go to the new interface and you upload the video, you upload your text, you cannot.
Oh, so basically it isn't possible. There's no porting.
It's not pragmatic, I will say that. And that's the problem. I would say at this point, it is a profound challenge to move a course from one platform to another. So,
well, before we delve more into Open Learning Server, perhaps we should ask why you're coding it in ColdFusion, because we've got thousands of listeners who are ColdFusion developers or managers, and they're probably curious, you're doing a fresh new project. Why do it in ColdFusion, and what any other technologies you're using?
Well, I like ColdFusion. That's part of the reason why I've come up with it. But then again, years ago, I used to use Prototype for my Ajax in JavaScript. Along came jQuery. I didn't jump on it at first because I wanted to let it work out the bugs. jQuery 2 came along. It was solid. And at learnable.com, they used to have a course that I put up there. And I will put it this way, the course must have been doing good because I was making about $2,000 a month plus on it. So at this point, I don't have any courses. They changed how they were paying out, etc. So, which was their right. I'm not upset about that, but it did demotivate me creating an update. So, but with that, and the fact that I have done a number of books through Pact, I am used to creating learning resources. And ColdFusion, as I looked at that, what do I want to do? Do I want to jump ship or do something different? And I ended up writing my own framework, which was back during the jQuery days. But then we started going to these, the new Angular, React, and Vue.js.
All those front-end clever things, right, that some developers use. The PWAs, SPAs, and would you like a few? Okay, you better decode those or let acronyms. PWA, Progressive Web App. What was the PSA? Or was that a joke?
SPAs came before PWAs. They call it a single-page application.
Oh.
Usually you hit a website and ColdFusion or whatever your server is returns a page. Then you enter a form or click on a link, and when you click or enter that form, it goes back to the server, kicks you a new page, and everything's a new page. So with that, here's what changed. You go to the server with these new single-page apps, which could be any of those 3 platforms and a few others. It brings back one page, but when you fill out a form, it sends the data to the server, comes back, and it updates the page using templates. jQuery, when we were using jQuery, well, it was nice, but you had to write these long manual scripts telling the page how to update, and it was usually one page. You wouldn't do multiple pages that way. So that's where the single page app comes. It runs like a multi-page, but it's actually only one. So,
and it's more responsive for the user of the app.
The way I put it is jQuery brought us closer to a desktop experience for a single page. But we lost the ability to think in the nice, clean simplicity of a template. With the new technology, we're back to that friendly template. Plus, now we're thinking like an application instead of just a page within an application. That's what a single-page application is. A progressive web app is a generation beyond that. Progressive web apps add the ability to store the data in your browser cache. You can go online, offline, which means it'll run like an actual app. In fact, if you store something on your device, you can go to the desktop, click on a progressive web app that you downloaded the website interface to your device, including your computer, and it runs Chromeless. It doesn't even run inside the browser. It looks and acts like a regular app, and if it's programmed that way, it can work offline. When you go back online, it'll synchronize, and a whole bunch of other features. So it's kind of neat because you can actually build a whole app if you don't need the full 3D gaming or stuff as a progressive web app, deliver it to a user so they can stick it on their desktop and run it. which when people do that, I think there's like a 60% increase in engagement. So it's worth it.
Wow.
And
that sounds impressive to have.
Yes. So there's all those benefits. And when the user wants to update it, you don't have to have any App Store approval because you update it through your site through the PWA technology.
Oh, so next time they connect to the internet, it just gets the latest version of the app.
That's fundamental.
But the app, when we say app, it's not like you have to code a special version for the phone or tablet. You're just coding a website using Progressive Web App technology, whether that's Vue or whatever.
I would say it's special because you add the features in, but you're right. It's using HTML, JavaScript, CSS. You're not going off building. There you go. What is Microsoft's tool? I should know this. It's not Xavier. Something.
It's called Microsoft hard to use. No, I'm just joking.
Yes, but you don't have to go using Ionic or anything like that. You can just program this right in the regular JavaScript HTML. So, and it's been about a year that all the browsers have got where they support this. And by all, no, I do not mean Internet Explorer.
Apparently, it's called Microsoft PWA. Very imaginative name there.
So, let's see.
Project Web App. So, but you're not using that. You're using the Vue.js in order to achieve that. Is that true? Or?
I'm using Vue.js with other stuff when I build a PWA. Correct.
And I'll just mention to listeners, if you're into progressive web apps, I did a whole episode on that with Ray Camden, episode 73, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes. So let's talk a bit more. You mentioned you're using CFML. So does that mean Lucee or Adobe ColdFusion or?
We have not settled on that. In fact, my goal is to make it run on both. And I want to make it run on both because it is an open source project. And I would like to. And the goal is to make this free along the same idea how, I'm going to say a bad word in the ColdFusion community, the same way WordPress is free. Now I have to go get the developer soap and wash my mouth out.
Oh, no. It's just another framework. I mean, what's the big deal, guys?
But WordPress right now is literally over a third of the internet's running on it. And it's part of the reason for that is that platform is just totally free for anybody to use. You can put hosting on it, and I want to do the same thing with Open Learning Server. I want to make it just available. Now, historically, if we had tried to do this 10 years ago, doing Open Learning Server with ColdFusion would have one major roadblock. What percentage of servers offered ColdFusion?
Not many.
What? There's this new technology, something about shipping containers, Docker?
Yes, that lets you run ColdFusion on any cloud server.
Right, and you can go now to Google, run it there when there's hosting. You can go to Azure, run it there. You can go to Amazon, run it there, including Ortis now has a Amazon AWI image. I don't know how to use that. I can't learn everything. But I think it is awesome that they do because I can build containers that can be stuck on that type of an image and run over there.
Yeah.
So fundamentally, my point is now ColdFusion can be run anywhere. So this is a viable service because one of the themes to containerization is what we call microservices. That little container is a small piece. And if someone wants to build it and run a version of it on Lucee or on Adobe ColdFusion, then they can do that. And I don't see any reason to fight that.
Are you planning to use a microservice architecture for this, or?
Yes, absolutely. I'm planning.
Tell us what a microservice is for those who haven't come across that, because that's quite a new architecture that not everyone's coding. I would say less than 1% of ColdFusion developers are coding using microservices.
Okay, let's say you have a front end built with Vue, and you have people hitting it. So they hit it, and they get the stuff, and it loads it. So your front end gets loaded to their browser, and they can run it. That's where your PWA is, whatever. So once it's loaded, it doesn't get hit a lot. So let's say you have a very popular site, and there's so much traffic going back and forth for your API, your backend written in ColdFusion, that you have 10 servers running on that side. Well, you may only want, for redundancy, 2 or 3 of your front end, and then you can scale as many as you need on the back end, where historically what we did is we put them both together. And those are different services. They don't have the same needs, the same load, so there's no purpose to sticking them together. So with a microservice architecture, you scale the pieces that need to be scaled. And you keep that thing packaged. And it's funny, we did this thing years ago in development when we started doing object-oriented code. It's called encapsulation. So you can think of, if you're a developer and you understand encapsulation, microservice architecture is doing server encapsulation. The server that does this job should stand on its own, and it doesn't need to know about everyone else. It just needs to interface with them.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense. Instead of having a monolithic server architecture where, you know, like you're saying, that memory instance and CPU instance has to deal with everything.
Right.
You know, you split it up into different pieces, and if some part of your app needs, you know, 10 times as much resources, 10 times as much CPU, or 10 times as much memory, or whatever, the little microservice for that piece of the app can get those extra resources, can have a whole cluster of copies of itself so that it can provide what's needed. And then the bits of the app that only get run occasionally or aren't resource hogs, they don't need a lot of containers.
Right. Well, a big monolithic app is like trying to end the Star Wars series. And you end up, it's sort of like the Dark Lord that has all the power and everything. And when you try and migrate from that to something else, you have a lot of unhappy fans. So it really is like trying to end a Star Wars series.
Well, that's never going to happen, I don't think.
No, but the George Lucas series, the actual movies, they did get to the last one with that. And the last series, without giving spoilers, not everyone was happy with how it ended.
Oh, well, then there's an opportunity there to have yet another sequel.
So, well, they have to make
a prequel or a parallel quill or whatever you call it, where they go and do some story that happened at the same time as something else.
But to that point, there's too much power in one place, and the story just doesn't flow the same. Some people will like that, other people won't. But when you try and migrate out of that, it's very difficult. And that's the problem with a large monolithic server is how do you, if you want to update a piece of it, how do you do that? You can't modernize small pieces simply. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges we have with software development for servers these days is nearly everything in the past we built monolithic, and migrating that to small pieces is a skill in itself.
Yes, you kind of have to totally refactor it, really.
There are techniques to doing that. We're doing that at my day job, and we're learning to migrate packages of it. We're using Vue.js to build front ends for those pieces and collections. So we're keeping it, and then we can shift the back end after the fact, but we've got the whole front end for that segment of the monolithic app. So we're building a piece here and a piece here. And the thought originally was you need to redo the whole front end and back end for these pieces. But with these SPAs, you're actually able to build a collection of the front end just for those pieces, and you can keep using the back end and migrate that over to a separate API upgrade later. That lets you step, the tortoise and the hare, slow and steady. The key is continual progress. And that's exactly what doesn't typically happen with a monolithic app. With a monolithic app, it's trying to get 100 hares to beat the tortoise at the same time. There's a whole bunch of problems. All the rabbits not only need to take naps at that point, they're a necessity from dealing with project management.
It is a problem. Let's turn to a somewhat controversial topic in ColdFusion land, which is, are you using a framework for the ColdFusion part of this code? And if so, which one?
We're choosing ColdBox because it is the most actively supported framework out there, and there is aggressive updating in this framework. In fact, last week we just attended the annual Into the Box conference. I was teasing them during the podcast yesterday. I told them next year you need to do 3 tracks because I did 2 tracks. Do your 2 box tracks, but people keep saying they would like a track that's not box technologies, and call your 3rd track out of the box.
There you go. Well, I think a fair amount of their topics were not box. I'd say at least 30%. Last year, it was 50% of the stuff was just general ColdFusion.
It actually is, but that would signal to people that, and a lot of the technologies will run outside of ColdBox, but they don't realize that.
Yes. Well, and the other misconception, both about the conference Into the Box and the whole line of box products, is a lot of people think that you have to use ColdBox to use CommandBox or TestBox, and they're totally independent. In fact, although I understand why autists name them all box this, box the other, it's actually it's confusing.
They got in the box when they were naming them.
Yes, they got in. Terrible joke. So now they're forever having to educate people that, at least half the box products, if not all of them, I'm a little confused if any of them actually any of the box products depend on ColdBox. I sort of want to say none of them do. Rulebox and Logbox, I think they're independent as well. I'll have to ask Brad.
Swagger does, but some of their libraries might. But other than that,
you mean like the cb promises or futures or whatever it was they just released?
Actually, I think that might be independent also, but I'm not sure yet.
I think the ones that start with CB are dependent on ColdBox, like cbElasticSearch and cbPromises and.
Right. You brought up the CB Future, which is what's coming with ColdBox 6, the next upgrade, which is what I'm targeting. One of the reasons I'm using the box technologies is I like Lucee. I love Lucee. I like Lucee differently. For those of us who, I'm not old enough to remember it, but I have seen the reruns. But I like Lucee and I like Adobe ColdFusion. But their updates they're not following the sprint model for updates, although Lucee has started to head that direction. So it's not every 2 weeks or every 4 weeks we get the next version, the next version, the next version. And that's like they're doing that with Adobe Creative Cloud, for instance. But that's not the way we're getting it for ColdFusion. So we've got all these new features that are coming out in modern Java, no, we don't have the features because they're not built into Lucee or Adobe ColdFusion yet. So what Ortis realized is those features are still completely accessible, and CB Futures, cbStreams, a lot of these technologies that they're building actually give us access to modern Java before they actually arrive in the core framework, Lucee or Adobe ColdFusion. So why am I looking about using ColdBox? It's because I get to use more modern development techniques. And if that is the theme of their podcast, Modernize or Die. So what it looks like is they're actually eating their own dog food. They're achieving the non-hypocrite status.
Yes, they've always been good at that, I think. They make the dog food and they eat the dog food.
Right.
So,
those technologies are generally available to the whole community, not just for box users. So,
yeah. I'm pretty sure that those cbPromises, cbStreams, and cbElasticSearch all require ColdBox. I might be wrong on that, but I haven't really had a chance to look at cbPromises in detail. And I'm not finding much in Google searches, so either. But maybe I'll ping Brad and ask him and see if I can add something into the show notes on it, or at least a link.
Sure.
So yeah, using a version 6 of ColdBox that just came out, so you can leverage all these modern development techniques that are being released is great, and it works on either Lucee or Adobe CF, so
right.
Good either way. Though I will add that ColdBox 6, I forget what versions of Lucee and Adobe CF it supports, but I want to say kind of the latest version and maybe one older version.
Yeah, they're shaking out the bugs. It's not a full release. It's an RC candidate right now. So like I said, they are shaking that off. I did after the conference on Saturday, I did a doc update because I couldn't spin up the 6 beta. And I found out that you have to add special code to use when you create an app with command box, you have to target the templates that are already aligned with the 6.0 version. But you go to the ColdBox docs and you see how to do it. That was my minor contribution. So,
all right. Well, I think I saw that on the Box Slack group. So thanks for helping on that and trying it out. Hopefully it'll get fully released in the near future.
All those docs are completely available. So if you have a GitHub account, anyone out there who's listening, and you cross something that should be updated in the docs, do a pull request. You will be very surprised how Lewis originally was very open to pull requests, and now he's like, oh my word, you're getting way too many pull requests. It's a rough life.
It is. Well, that's why they hired all those developers in El Salvador to help out with all this open source development stuff, because they couldn't do all their regular work and do all of this open source stuff as well.
It is a frustration Lewis enjoys, so give him some pleasurable pain.
Oh, there you go. Oh, all right. So sounds like you've got a great technology stack there of ColdFusion, ColdBox, and Vue.js, letting you create a modern open source app. But let's go back to
Quick, by the way, for database layer.
Oh, I'll add that into the show notes. Quick. What is Quick for those who've never come across it?
Well, it started with technologies like Hibernate, and Hibernate does what's called an ORM, Object Relation Management. And historically, we said the database, I still remember our former active community leader was Ben Forda, and he stated accurately for the time that your database is the foundation of your app. And it was back then. But nowadays, we've had this thing where we start referring to, instead of our data being the foundation, it runs up inside the app and let's say you have a user. Well, you have a user entity is what we call it. And let's say the user has a blog post. Well, the blog posts are entities. The categories, all these things become entities, and the database, all it does is it keeps a persistent store of what belongs inside the entities. So you're shifting the thinking to the database is just for persistence. The actual think and the way stuff codes goes up inside the entities. And you get the same thing when you're using Vuex. There's a Vuex ORM, and you can hook Axios into it. And when you look at actually sending a call from Vuex using the ORM entity, it's say your entities, you're looking for a post, you do blog.api.get, and you pass it the URL, and it will automatically populate the entity object. When the object populates, the pages automatically update. And you handle it all with that because you set up the object. The objects have all the logic in them.
So it basically is, it creates an object-oriented database layer on top of your relational database.
Right, and if you've done ColdFusion ORM and you've been frustrated with it, look at Quick. Quick is achieving what you were looking for.
Now, is Quick the same as QB? I think I've seen it referred to as that as well.
QB is a library Quick depends on.
Oh, okay.
This podcast is brought to you by TerraTech, the ColdFusion experts. Develop, secure, optimize. Get detailed show notes on today's episode and your free CF Alive Modern ColdFusion Guide at terratech.com. That is TerraTech.com. And now back to today's show.
Well, very cool. That's something to play.
It's a query builder, and basically it lets you build elegant queries without having to go to SQL. And again, the benefit to that is if someone's on MySQL or someone's on Postgres or someone's on Microsoft SQL or Oracle, it just works. It knows the dialect. It will translate for you. And Quick, quite often, Quick will outrun the built-in ORM. So maybe they named it Quick for a reason. And Eric did not pay me for any of these comments.
Yes, he's the the chief Quick developer.
He's the Quick Lord.
Quick. Okay. All right. I think we should move now to what you're doing with this open learning server. You know, who's going to use it and why?
So number one, if you're a teacher, you're creating courses and you want portability. Let's say I create a course that's on an open server just on the internet, and someone comes to me and their corporation, they lock down everything coming and going for the company for security. So for anything like this, they want their staff to be able to take my course, but it has to be moved inside their server. Well, using Open Learning Server, I can be creating courses and others can, and they can take that packaged course and install it inside their server for the staff to use because it's packageable. So they just set it inside their server. Of course, they still may have to open up, depending how we build it for YouTube or Vimeo for the video. But usually that isn't a security issue.
So what you're saying is the educational institution can, instead of depending on a cloud-based proprietary learning system, they can put this in the cloud. They can put it on their own servers.
Right.
They can move it around really easily.
That's one of the four focus areas. Yes, that was the first.
Oh, well, tell us the other three.
2 is whenever I take a course, I've taken lots of online courses. Let's say I was writing a book on, say, ColdFusion 8, or that's a book I wrote, so I'm familiar with that, or I updated it for ColdFusion 9. A while ago, I put this book out on Knockout.js. If you read any of my books, you're going to start and take the same path everybody else takes. When I wrote my really good jQuery course, when you took my course, you started and you basically took the path everybody else took. So if you weren't familiar with JavaScript, then my course would have been rougher. If you were highly familiar, seasoned developer, then my course probably went slow for you. So what if you could take a course and make multiple tracks so people could go through it at their own rate? Well, that seems like it would be beneficial right up front. In fact, you would think creating a course like that would take a lot longer. But here's what I will tell you. Having written 3 books and online courses, you'll be surprised how much, if you're building a good course, you can burn a lot of time figuring out where's the bandwidth? Where do I put this? What do I leave in? What do I take out? But if I can stick 3 tracks in there, I haven't tested this yet, but I'm wondering if it'll even take more time. It might not for a good course.
Well, it could take, you don't have to do what you're saying, figure out what the sweet spot is. And, so you can just put all the learning in there and training. And you can also, I assume the system would know what paths through the learning that people have done and tell you that here's where they focused, here's where you need to add more, here's where they got stuck.
And let's say someone's coming along, they've learned front-end development, but they're not really a database person, and they hit the database section. Well, they could pivot for that part of the course to a more detailed track. Or if they're reading through it and it's like, okay, I thought I knew this part, they can repeat a more detailed track and then boost back up to the fast track. That's kind of a cool concept. I wish people wrote books like that. But how do you? You'd have to write an ebook with multiple. That may be in the future. Maybe I'll inspire that. But I'm trying to do it with the courses at least. So I think that has been done. I've seen novels where it was a bit primitive, but basically you got to decide where the characters would go. Right. Is this character going to get promoted or killed off or whatever? And then the novel has an alternative version based on that. So I forget what they call those things. And let's face it, a lot of role-playing video games work that way, right? I remember an old flip book that you move from page to page. It was like a dog fighter game. That was the first one of those I ever saw.
I think
turn the plane during a dog fight, whether you would fire or whatnot, and you'd go to that page, and that's how you knew whether you beat the opponent or not. So,
there you go.
It was fun before we had all this technology.
Yeah, but I think there is a convergence between video games and education in that a lot of education gets gamified. They give you scores and points and make it more fun. And a fair chunk of games have some educational component to them.
I am for gamification. Personally, I will probably support it, but I probably won't build the courses that do what I call edutainment. If I have to entertain you for you to endure learning, I probably won't be the person that will build the course you want. Because I try and do my education or entertainment app. Now, making it fun, I'm okay with. But sometimes I think people feel too dependent on entertaining their audience. I want someone who wants to learn what I'm teaching. And if I'm going to make a fantasy story, I'll go do that separate.
All right.
What?
So why don't we quickly talk about I think there were two other reasons why.
The second is what I call adaptive instruction. Based on your test, tags an instructor puts in there, or quiz scores, a course ought to be able to figure out what you need more, what should go slower, what should be repeated. So actually give it the ability to give you assistance and aim at the tracks. And here's a wild concept. As you're going through and you're struggling with those things, imagine if the course could tell the instructor, people are having problems in these areas, so the instructor could know to make additional instruction or to create links that it automatically would hand to students that are struggling in those areas. So adaptive instruction, I laughed once I realized that depends on AI, and I happen to have picked two letters that match AI, so I'm going to keep those. So the fourth and last was what I call R&R, and we all take courses as we're taking the course, and we get done. Over time, we lose the course. We lose what we did, all that learning, but it doesn't stay with us. The R&R is repetition for retention. And what I want to do is build a system. When you take a course, you have a big chapter, a difficult chapter you read, you go through it, you do the exercises, you get the concept, but it's new to you. Well, you need some repetition there, but you don't want to do the whole chapter. And let's be honest, anyone besides me highlight the books? Absolutely. Hard books, I got the marker, I highlight. And what percentage of the time do you go back and scour those for the highlights?
Yeah, not too much. Though I do that on my Kindle books, and there's an app now that will take all those highlights and, quiz you on them in a spaced repetition way. So similar to what you're suggesting. Right.
And that's what I'm after. I want to be able to pull that back and even let someone make notes while they're doing, and find ways to integrate that in people's learning styles. People learn different. We have different motivations. One of the books that I really like, I don't know if you've ever heard of this book.
What Motivates Me? It's flickering in and out of the virtual background you have running there. Very cool background, John.
So what motivates me, years ago, because I do life coaching stuff on the side, and my wife liked one of the Strength Finders things that I took, and she went and took the course, and we were having a while after that one of those relational tension points. And she got thinking, I wonder if I can use my strengths to figure out a way through this debate. So she got thinking about them, and she asked me, because one of her top strengths is harmony. So she said, honey, where is harmony on your list? I went and checked. I said, it's number 34. He said, 34? How many are there? I said, there's 34. She says, okay, so harmony is not always a priority with you. I said, no. I said, my actual core heart and beat is strategic strengths. I'm very much about strategy, learning, ideation. Those are my top strengths. So to that point, a while later, I went and took this book. They have an online test. And I walked into the other room. I said, I'm done with the test. So here's what Miss Harmony says. I don't know, Harmony was on vacation that day. So she said, because of the harmony and the bottom score, she says, what's your bottom score of motivations? I'm like, really? Now, unfortunately, she's been learning from me about the coaching stuff, so she caught me, and I didn't even catch this. She said, you're dodging. Oh, she was right. I was dodging. I said, so I look at my wife, and I said, well, my bottom motivation is making money. In a nice, supportful way, being sarcastic here, she says, boy, this test is accurate. But it was. I make money when it has a strategic benefit. Otherwise, I don't care. But my top motivation is impact. So when you mix my strengths, strategic strengths are my core, and my top motivation is impact, you start to understand why I do stuff. And that's why I'm more of a coach than I am a comforter.
I'm going to have to read all these different options in this book, so I can try it out.
Impact is where my kick is. And the same way, so you're looking at strengths as far as talents go, you're looking at motivations. Well, when we're building learning systems, do our learning systems speak to the individual learner? Are we focusing on the learner? Are we making our teaching agile? Or are we making a course that lets the student become more agile? I think right now our courses are getting better and better at helping a student learn to apply themselves with agility. That's out there. What I don't see is more and more systems, and some of this is already being created in different places, but it's not the top leading courses or the core software or sites. I want to see more agile instruction, and I want to equip the instructors with more tools and resources to achieve that. And that's why I'm calling this project my Open Learning Server. I have a code name because I'm in the ColdFusion world. No, it's not named after a god. But what I wanted to do is think of a name for the project that expressed that. So what we're calling this is Project Sullivan. And I'm assuming you know do you know who the teacher Sullivan would be?
No, not off the top of my head.
You do, but you aren't thinking of it, which is fine.
Yeah.
Anne Sullivan, Helen Keller's teacher.
Oh, okay.
If there's anybody who understood agile instruction, I'm going to give her a top 10.
Because Helen Keller was deaf and blind, and yet she still was able to learn and achieve a lot in life thanks to Anne Sullivan.
Right, and that took a lot of creative engagement, a lot of agile instruction. And if we can take AI and the tools and stuff we have out there nowadays, I think we can take learning to a new level, not by creating another tool, but using the tools we already have. Let's go ahead and put a lot of this technology to taking the creativity of the instructors and the creators and letting them engage more productively with the students.
Wow. Well, it sounds really cool, John. If listeners want to help, how can they do that?
I think you have a link. They can send a link. There's two types of help we're looking for right now. One is if you want to be a beta learner as we start creating this, you can list yourself there. And the other is if you want to help create courseware. And I think I need to go ahead and add a third link to that. But and that third link that I'll need to add is a link for people who want to help actually create the OLS software and resources.
All right. Well, we'll put that link in there. It's business.of.technology is the website. And then there's quite a long URL after that we'll put in the show notes.
Yeah, don't you love those new domains?
I know. You can just have any word almost. So let's thank you for sharing all about how you're doing this and the technology stack you're doing you create it.
My core strengths, the strategic impact, and the desire to create open learning server. Any overlap?
There you go.
So yes, I am highly motivated to see if I can I can't do it alone, I'm sure of that, but I think I can do a lot to anchor the project. So
great. So let's talk about a question I've heard among quite a few ColdFusion developers who work in corporate jobs.
Yes.
There's resistance to using open source inside corporations. And I know you have some strong views on that. So,
well, one of the reasons they don't like to use open source, I'm going to go with the reasons that I've been told, is when it comes to open source, you're using code written by someone else. How do we know we can trust it? And here's the question I have. How many people work for, let's say, ColdFusion, or if someone's using PHP and they're using Zend, or if you're using Microsoft Windows, how many people actually wrote this new part of the software that you're putting into use? Microsoft Teams or whatever. All these commercial things were written by a limited number of people and tested by a limited number of people. What's the difference? I understand now wanting commercial support for something, that's fine. But a lot of open source solutions actually offer commercial support. So if that's your thought and that's your reasoning, then resisting open source that didn't have commercial support, that makes some sense. But if you can get commercial support for it, that's another thing. Plus, open source, if the feature's not doing something and you hit a critical snag, you could actually hire a third-party person to create a fix and then contribute that back to the open source, but you could get up and running again. If there's a critical bug in Microsoft Teams, you have to wait for Microsoft to fix it.
right, and their release cycle on fixing it, their priority on it,
right.
How important is it to them, and what's their release cycle?
Now, one of the principles in a new book that I'm reading through, I'm not done yet, this book on architecture.
Fundamentals of Software Architecture. Who's that by?
It's by two gentlemen, Mark Richards and Neil Ford, and it's an O'Reilly book. And it is a very new book. It just came out. It no longer has a new car smell, but it is still pretty new. One of the things they bring out is if you find a solution that does everything and there's no drawbacks to it, all that means is you haven't used the solution very long. Because there are no solutions without trade-offs. And that's one of the principles they teach. Everything has trade-offs. There is no best solution. There's only a solution that you're going to choose because it's the mix you're choosing. Mm-hmm. And it's good to know that. In fact, one of the things they're teaching is the second rule of architecture is the why is more important than the how. So now they've got me all messed up because I've got all these docs I've written over the years. And I'm going back saying, okay, now someone reading this doc, I'm telling them how to do something. But as things change and needs change and technology changes, they don't have the whys. I made the decision, so they don't know if they should flip a switch on something or not. And I'm like, this is a really good book. It's painful, but it's a really good book.
Well, we'll put that down in the show notes for people who want to find it more easily, along with some other books on learning systems that you mentioned to me earlier,
right?
For folks in that. But coming back to open source and the corporation, so you can get support, and the ones you're using for this project, you said you would use Adobe ColdFusion, or you might use Lucee. I mean, you can get paid support for Lucee ColdFusion,
right?
ColdBox, you can get paid support for ColdBox.
Absolutely.
Vue.js, I'm assuming you can get paid support for that. I'm not sure who provides that.
If you can't get it from the core group, which you might be able to, there are plenty of third parties that actually have qualified people that do it. And that's the other thing. A lot of time, you just need to make sure that it's a platform that can be supported. And Vue.js, that Evan Y-O-U, that is his actual name, who created Vue.js, he has been building an organization around him. And they're very open with how they're doing stuff, why they're doing it. They take pull requests just like Lewis does with ColdBox and all the other box technologies. So it's neat to be able to contribute and see something come back in a really rapid form.
And, as you said to me earlier, it's sort of like companies who are like, they're okay using Microsoft VS Code, but they would, because even though that's open source, but right.
Well, we'll use VS Code to create software. We use lots of tools that are open source, but we don't want our stuff written that way. And I was like, okay, a lot of this is just a comfort. Or, getting back to this book, speaking of which, books, since I have a lot of them.
The Outward Mindset. I'm saying it because some of the people are not on video, so they have to hear it.
Right, thank you. The Outward Mindset's written by the Arbinger Institute. They wrote a couple of books before that on mindset and understanding, and you're going to like this. All their books, they teach when you have the bad mindset. Do you know what they call it?
No.
It's being in the box.
Oh. Okay.
So here I like to go to an annual conference, into the box. I must have a bad mindset.
Yeah, naturally you should go to the Out of the Box conference.
That's why I need the other track.
Yes, there you go.
But learning to have an outward mindset, which is the good side of that, is, and by the way, we all get into the box daily. It's learning to spot it and learning to shift out of it. And learning to do that is what their books are about. And I would say if someone has a corporate mindset, we don't use that, you could be correct, because architectures say that you might be correct. But I would strongly encourage you to consider getting a copy of these books, putting your people through the books, and then finding out if it's a in-the-box mindset driving that conclusion. Because it could be, we could be doing it for the wrong reasons, but for the right motives.
I think another reason some people in corporations don't like open source is they're afraid there's some legal implication if they utilize some open source in their software. Now suddenly their software has to be open source as well. And most modern open source licenses don't require that at all. Correct.
I think WordPress actually does have some of those limitations. There's an example of where you would not use WordPress.
Right, but jQuery or Angular or React or Vue or Lucee or ColdBox, none of those have that legal implication there.
Correct.
They basically say, don't rip off this software itself and give it another name and pretend it's yours and sell it for money. You can't do that. But you want to use it to make other things with it, fine.
But if you want to build a product, put it in there as your core tech and sell it for money, they're completely happy with that. But you can't sell that library as yours for money.
Yeah, that would be deceptive. So any other false reasons out there, or real reasons why people don't use open source?
More than likely, commercial products that they're using have open source in them, but so they probably are using open source and don't know it. But that's a humor point of mine that I've debated over the years. But I don't really think that I know of any dominant reason. I think the intentions are good, and I think that's a lot of it. When someone says, I don't want to use open source, they have good reasons for that. We need to look at what their intentions are, what their motivations are. Yeah, guess what? It's leaking through. They've corrupted me. We need to look at their intentions. We need to engage with them and consider what their concerns are. Help them reach their objectives, and we may be able to reach their objectives with open source. They just need to understand that. So stop fighting against them and start competing with them. We're on the same team. And one of the things I will say, that book, The Outward Mindset, I found really interesting. They said, what if you're in a company where nobody else is going to get out of the box? They showed very solidly that if you do, it will benefit you even if no one else does. So you don't become outward-minded to control other people. You become outward-minded for your benefit. And if someone has a stigma on stuff like that, look at your options. You may not need to lead the company, but, that's an option. But I would say before you think that way, because you're frustrated because they won't use open source, read the book. It'll change your outlook. And by the way, you don't have to read it. You can get Audible.
Oh, okay.
You can listen too.
Well, we'll put that book with all the other ones you've shared and in the show notes.
And by the way, for someone who's low on harmony, it's a really good book.
So let's turn to the questions I ask all my guests, which are, firstly, why are you proud to use ColdFusion?
I have used ColdFusion for decades. It has provided me a stable income. ColdFusion has provided my customers and or the companies I work for a profitable, productive solution. So basically, because it's been faithful to me as a creative tool, and it's been faithful to the people that I've created things for. Since it's winning on all fronts, I like using tools that win.
Very good. So, sometimes people are concerned that ColdFusion might be dying, or I think that's a bunch of, I can't think of a polite term for it, but BS would be the unpolite term.
I call that a myth.
Yeah, it's a myth. And it's a myth that's been floating around. And if it was going to be true, it would have happened by now, which it hasn't. But the question is, what would it take to make ColdFusion even more alive this year, in your opinion? When
I look at ColdFusion, what I look at is, in my coaching course that I teach, we have a slogan. The core of it is, how will you influence your future today? So when I look at ColdFusion, if we've had a down year, we've had an up year, if it's still viable, if we can still win with it, and it's still something that my customers will win with, that's what I'm looking at, is what is it, and how do we win with it today? And that's one of the things I like about Ortis's offerings. They're looking at, here's Java stuff we're not getting as fast because of the way it's developed. So does that handicap us with ColdFusion? No, it doesn't. And they're showing us how we can pull that stuff in and actually implement it. And they're building libraries for us. And they're open source, so we can look at how they did it and build libraries too. So bottom line is, ColdFusion has, by example and by these processes, we have the paths to winning. We have the paths to influencing our future. And that's what we do, is we approach it with a good mindset, and we don't look at, and this is one of the things I tell my family regular. Have you ever heard that someone will bring something up and they say, what's wrong with this? It's like, settle down. I don't want to ask what's wrong with it. I want to know, is this what I need to win? Is it a viable path to winning? And what makes it so I can win with it? If it's answering those questions, I don't need to know what's wrong with it, because I know it's right. And a lot of that's just attitude and mindset. Well,
part of the CF Alive mission is to help shift mindsets in ColdFusion developers to realize it is alive and modern and a secure language. And it's better than, most other platforms out there at this point in time, with all those box tools and all the other cool stuff, that Pete from Foundio puts out, and the Fusion Reactor guys and the people at Lucee and Adobe.
And
There's amazing new things, and it's really fast to develop in and runs fast.
one of the big trends in all the technology right now is command line utilities. And that's everything from Compose with PHP to Vue CLI, the Node Package Manager tools, etc. Well, like all those tools, we have Command Box, and it's one of those newer things. And I've heard people who have left the ColdFusion community, including one who I feel free to quote without him feeling insulted. Ray Camden said if Command Box had been out when he left, he wouldn't have. And he didn't leave because he didn't like ColdFusion. There was job needs, etc. And he's still, stay up with his blog, he's still got stuff that's very connected with us, and he's still a very avid friend of the community. So
he is. I've had him at least twice on the podcast. So and that Progressive Web App episode was with him. So and I just want to say to listeners, what would it take for you to help make ColdFusion more alive? Maybe there's some small thing people listening can do to just make the whole ColdFusion community more positive, or to do a blog post or a social media post that's something positive about what you've done with ColdFusion, or what you're excited about in ColdFusion 2020, or the latest version of Lucee, or ColdBox 6, or whatever the thing is. And I think every single person who is listening to this podcast, who is in the ColdFusion community as a CF programmer, can do at least one small thing every week that pushes ColdFusion to being more alive. And it only has to take a minute if it's a small thing, or it might take an hour if it's a bigger thing, but it depends how much time you have to support the revolution. But if all...
It's the tortoise and the hare. It's slow, steady progress. It's not the giant, shiny stuff. It's especially when you have all of us contributing.
Yeah.
That's what creates momentum. And momentum is how we win.
And sometimes, I'll just say this is a little controversial. Sometimes that contribution could be keeping your mouth shut and not saying something critical of someone else who's trying to do something in the community, but thinking, how can I support them? What is it they're doing good that I like? Or how could I give them feedback in a supportive way of the things I think they want to improve, instead of ripping them a new excretion hole? Okay, I'll come off my soapbox there, but I think that's been an issue in the past in our community, and I think that's been changing. And I just want to acknowledge that sometimes not typing a reply that was going to be nasty is the right thing to do.
Right. There's been a habit in the past for people to say, why are we building another one of these?
Yeah.
Well, that's because over time, let's see, why build a new taxi service?
Because
Uber,
maybe the other ones didn't give everything you needed, or maybe you were bored.
That's disruption. There's a new way of doing things, new opportunity. Yeah. And why build a new style of bookstore? Amazon. Why build a new style of server? Docker. Because good can come from it. So instead of saying that, say, I don't have a vision for what you're doing, but I'll watch because you may surprise me. Good luck.
There you go. Or if you do resonate with it, maybe help out or promote it and tell other people about it. Now, offer criticism, not cynicism. There you go. Now, you went to the Into the Box conference, as did I, which was a virtual conference this year because of the whole lockdown situation. And hats off to Autis for pulling that together in just a month or so, when they found out there was a lockdown and they had to put this together. What did you enjoy at this year's Into the Box, John?
Well, I enjoyed it still had multiple tracks. The sessions were still engaging. And technically, in some cases, I may have been closer to a screen, so the screen may have been larger. So that was kind of nice. But I like the tracks in particular. And some of the stuff I talked about, Ortis, updating and modernizing ColdFusion, I really liked some of those features. And it was the first attempt, so we weren't good at it yet, but there were several times during the thing where we were using the Sococo interface, and we got together for group chats, and we actually had those sit-down chats. We didn't get to sit at a bar or go to a restaurant or something like that, but we had some of that. And we will learn to do that with online conferences. And I have said this already, of all the online conferences I've attended to date, this is the first multi-track one I've attended, so that was a big bonus. And number two, because we had some of that actual connecting happening, it's initial, we still have a long way to go, more to learn, but we actually were doing some of that social we would have missed, that we missed because we aren't there in person. It wasn't as good, but it was there and we're learning. So that's a new thing. And I'm expecting, because of this whole virus, and there's going to be a whole thriving and focus of people being disruptive at building online conferences now.
Absolutely. I've heard a lot about that. So, well, great. Well, looking forward to Into the Box in 2021. I'm sure there'll be lots of amazing things there. For folks who missed Into the Box, I just want to let you know it's possible to buy the recordings of all the sessions. I think they'll be out in a couple of weeks. So, in other words, they'll be out in June, because we're recording this in the middle of May. I don't know when this episode will release. It's not just about box stuff. There was a lot about other cool things you can do in ColdFusion and database stuff, and all kinds of great content in there.
Right.
So
there was a Kubernetes session. I'm a Swarm fan for Docker, but I went to the Kubernetes.
There you go.
We had a good session. It was informative.
Yeah, they were great speakers. Every single speaker I saw really did a great job. So hats off to all the speakers and Ortis, and thanks to the sponsors for helping out of it. That includes my, TerraTech, because we were one of the sponsors as well. But Foundio and Fusion Reactor and Ortis were also sponsors. So,
and I'm sure there would have been more sponsors, but when you only have a month and they haven't done this before, we're all off center.
There you go.
We'll adjust. That's what agility is about.
Right. So I really appreciate you coming on the podcast and talking to us about Open Learning Server and open source software and ColdFusion technology stacks, John. If people want to find you online, what's the best way to do that?
Well, they probably look for me on, there we go. I got to think, what's the business site? Not Facebook. LinkedIn.
LinkedIn.
Yes, I had Learnable in my brain. I couldn't get past it. LinkedIn. If you look for John Farrar on LinkedIn, I'm there. If I see ColdFusion or something in there, I will usually follow you back and connect there. If you're trying to market your business resources and whatnot, then I often don't, not because I don't respect that. It's actually because I try and realize I have limited capacity. So I try and keep my focus, because in other words, if someone in the community has a question, I can't answer it because I'm distracted with the other.
All right. Well, cool. Well, we'll put your LinkedIn URL into the show notes. I think you're related to CF Wheels, are you not?
I have played around in there. I love their framework. It's a little different than how I'm going to be building my stuff, but I will tell you there are a lot of times where CF Wheels is a front choice solution.
And don't you have a website that has SOS in it?
I used to, and I have SOS apps, but it's offline at the moment.
Oh, well, then we won't put that one in the show notes then.
I'm pushing over to Business of Technology.
Great.
Which is businessof.technology. I love these domains.
There you go. Well, great. Well, thanks so much, and see you at next year's Into the Box.
I will be there, hopefully.
Get detailed show notes on today's episode in your free CF Alive Modern ColdFusion Guide at teratech.com. That is teratech.com. Viva la CF Alive Revolution!